Maryland may be one of the smaller states in the United States, but its geography is anything but small. Tucked between the mountains and the sea, Maryland is a land of astonishing contrasts, hidden quirks, and boundaries that defy simple description. The state touches four major geographic regions, from the Appalachian highlands to the coastal plains. And as you dig deeper, you find that many of the facts about this place sound almost impossible until you truly understand how varied the terrain really is. To start with, Maryland is one of only two states in the nation that has both a mountain range and a tidal shoreline. And the distance between the highest and lowest points happens over just a few dozen miles. Turn one way and you're looking at peaks rising above 2,000 feet, and turn the other and you're gazing out over the vast Chesapeake Bay, one of the largest estuaries in the world. That contrast happens in a way few states can claim. The Appalachian Mountains don't just touch Maryland, they carve out the western part of the state, and within that region lies Sidling Hill, one of the most dramatic road cuts in North America. The interstate slices through rock layers that are hundreds of millions of years old, revealing a cross-section of the Earth's crust that looks more like a natural cathedral than a highway embankment. Geologists travel from around the world to study it because the rock formations exposed here tell a story of ancient oceans, shifting continents, and once-buried mountain chains. Maryland's waterways are just as extraordinary. The state has more than 4,000 miles of streams, rivers, and creeks, and that's excluding the jagged edge of the Chesapeake Bay shoreline itself. Add in all the twists of the bay's tributaries, and Maryland's total freshwater shoreline rivals that of some much larger coastal states. It's the reason why the state's motto is manly deeds, womanly words, and multitudinous waters, yet few people realize how true that is. Chesapeake Bay itself is a marvel of geography and ecology. It is the largest estuary in the United States, stretching over 200 miles from north to south. The bay's watershed covers more than 64,000 square miles across 6 states and the District of Columbia, which means that pollution, water flow, and environmental health are influences felt far beyond Maryland's borders. Yet despite this massive drainage system, the bay remains relatively shallow, only about 21 feet on average, making it unusually responsive to the winds, tides, and freshwater inflows that constantly reshape its beaches, marshes, and inlet systems. The bay's influence doesn't end with water. Maryland's infamous tidewater region, a vast plain of wetlands and rivers, was formed by rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age. These rising waters drowned river valleys and transformed the landscape, carving out the hundreds of small coves, creeks, and tributaries that define the region today. Some areas of tidewater Maryland are so low and flat that the horizon seems to melt into sky and water, making human measurement almost feel like an abstraction. Even off the bay, the Atlantic Ocean's influence shows up in surprising ways. While Maryland itself doesn't technically touch the open ocean, the state's eastern shore is separated from the Atlantic by just a narrow peninsula and a series of barrier islands. These islands act as mobile sand dunes on a colossal scale, shifting, merging, breaking, and reforming with each storm and tide cycle. One stretch of barrier islands, Chesapeake, is famous for its wild horses. These animals roam freely, swimming between islands and foraging in terrain that is literally drifting beneath their feet. In fact, the very rivers that define Maryland's landscape have peculiar evolutionary histories. The Potomac River, which makes up much of Maryland's southern boundary, cuts through the state at a place where the Appalachian ridges seem to align with river valleys elsewhere. The outcome is a river that appears to defy the surrounding topography, as if an invisible force carved a channel between the mountains instead of following a typical downhill gradient. Geologists call this an antecedent river, one that was there before the mountains it now slices through had fully formed, a paradox that makes Maryland's southern border one of the most extraordinary in the country. Speaking of borders, Maryland's boundary lines are uniquely shaped by geography and history. The state's boundary with Pennsylvania follows a line that was originally surveyed in the 1760s. Known as the Mason-Dixon line, it became a cultural shorthand for the division between North and South in the antebellum era. Yet the line itself was born of a land dispute between proprietors, not politics. Its surveyors used cutting-edge instruments for their day and measured over forested hills and rugged terrain with remarkable precision for the era. Maryland's northernmost boundary presents another oddity. Instead of a straight horizontal line like many states, it jogs around the headwaters of rivers and natural features. As a result, the state's northern edge makes a slight curve where the border meets water divides, a geographic compromise frozen in legal language. This means that small towns near the line are actually closer to lobbyists in DC than to their own state capitals, a quirk that sounds trivial until you consider how much geography can shape human life. West of the Chesapeake Bay, the tidal Potomac creates a network of embayments that extend well inland, reaching into places many people wouldn't expect to be influenced by tides. These tidal effects push upstream for miles, even into freshwater rivers, raising water levels during high tide and altering the ecosystem far from the ocean's edge. This tidal penetration is so extreme that some rivers in Maryland experience tidal influence even where the water tastes sweet, making them rare environments where freshwater and tidal cycles coexist in unexpected ways. Between the ridges of western Maryland and the bay's soft edges lies a region of rolling hills and farms, but even this seemingly unremarkable middle isn't what it first appears. Beneath the soil in many parts of central Maryland is a layer of limestone that creates sinkholes, springs, and underground drainage systems more commonly associated with the flatlands of Florida or Kentucky. Communities sometimes find small sinkholes opening in fields without warning, or discover underground caves that drain surface water rapidly during heavy rain. This hidden limestone geology doesn't show up on roadside signs, yet it subtly governs how water moves, where farms thrive, and where towns develop. Maryland's high points are equally surprising. The state's highest elevation, Hoy Crest, atop Backbone Mountain, reaches just over 3,300 feet. Not particularly tall compared to the Rockies or even the Smokies, but dramatic when you consider how quickly elevation drops toward the bay. Hoy Crest is a place of spruce forests and blustery summits, a stark contrast to the salt marshes near the Chesapeake, where you can see egrets and crabs in the same frame. From Hoy Crest, water flows in 3 different directions to eventually reach 3 different ocean outlets, an unusual hydrological condition shared by only a handful of places in North America. Streams from one side flow toward the Ohio Valley and ultimately the Gulf of Mexico, while others drain toward the Chesapeake Bay or directly into coastal estuaries. This triple divide makes Maryland one of the few states where rainfall within a short distance can end up in completely different sea basins depending on where it hits the ground. Even within the Chesapeake itself, the water is not uniform. There are areas of deep blue where currents and depths resemble open ocean conditions, while nearby shallows flash green in sunlight and teem with life. Some of the bay's deepest spots, especially near the mouth of the Susquehanna River, reach depths that surprise visitors who assume an estuary must be uniformly shallow. These deeper basins trap cold water in summer, creating pockets of thermal refuge for certain fish and underwater species that otherwise wouldn't thrive in such southern latitudes. Islands in the Chesapeake also defy expectations. Smith Island and Tangier Island, both in the lower bay, are culturally distinct communities with histories older than many American cities. Their residents often speak dialects influenced by generations of isolation, saltwater living, and migration patterns that predate state lines. And yet these islands are sinking, literally losing ground to erosion and rising tides at rates that threaten their long-term survival. Scientists estimate that some portions of these islands may disappear within decades unless human intervention alters their trajectory. That threat highlights another surprising fact. Maryland's sea level is not just rising because of global climate shifts, but also because the land itself is sinking in many coastal areas. This phenomenon, known as subsidence, combines with rising oceans to accelerate relative sea level rise, making the impacts more severe here than in some other places. Flooding that once occurred only during storms now happens during high tides alone, turning city streets near the water into temporary canals without a single raindrop falling. In southern Maryland, near the Potomac, freshwater rivers mingle so closely with tidal waters that oysters and blue crabs, species associated with salty water, are found far inland beside fish that prefer fresh water. This blend creates a rich mosaic of ecosystems that supports both commercial fisheries and recreational anglers, but also complicates management strategies because boundaries between freshwater and saltwater habitats blur and shift with weather and seasons. Northward, the Piedmont Plateau rises slowly out of the tidal plain, creating rolling hills that hide small waterfalls, exposed bedrock, and deep tree-lined ravines. Streams here run clearer and colder than those near the bay, and during heavy rain, they turn torrents that have carved narrow wooded gorges over millennia. Hikers following these streams often stumble upon cascades that seem more Appalachian than mid-Atlantic, reinforcing the fact that Maryland's geography refuses to be simple. Lakes in Maryland are often mistaken for natural features when in fact many are human-made and deeply tied to the state's energy and water management history. Liberty Reservoir and Loch Raven Reservoir near Baltimore, for example, were created by damming rivers to supply water to growing urban centers. Over time, these reservoirs have become recreational hubs and wildlife havens, supporting species from ospreys to migratory waterfowl, blending human engineering with natural life in ways that feel almost accidental. Perhaps the state's most peculiar feature is what geographers call the fall line, a boundary where the harder rocks of the Piedmont meet the softer sediments of the coastal plain. This invisible line dictated the location of early colonial cities because rivers suddenly become more navigable at this transition. Boats could travel upriver until they hit falls or rapids, making fall line towns ideal hubs for trade, mills, and settlement. In Maryland, this fall line contributed to the rise of cities like Baltimore, where the Patapsco River's navigable waters meet a geologic breakpoint that influenced commerce long before interstate highways existed. Its geography sounds impossible because it holds so many extremes in such tight proximity. Yet every ridge, river, marsh, and shoreline tells a consistent story, that this landscape has never been simple, and it has never been still.